By 2003, VR was dead. It was overhyped and underdelivered and too expensive to let live. However, a single 16-year-old visionary had his sights set on reinventing virtual reality as we knew it. Let's dive into part 2 of the history of video games. With VR mostly faded away as a forgotten fad, entrepreneur Palmer Luckey was looking to change this idea. Just like with Lenny Lipton and stereoscopic 3D, Palmer was intrigued with VR by building concepts as early as 16. After 50 prototypes and being completely self-funded, he was able to conceive a working prototype with haptic feedback called the PR1. This was happening while he was under the tutelage of VR veteran Mark Bolas at the USC Mixed Reality Lab in 2011. A year later, and 5 other previous prototypes, the Rift was born. While the creation was self-funded, he did not have enough capital to expand this to a mass market and go beyond his parents' garage. This is where Kickstarter comes in. In 2012, he quit his job at MXR and launched his company Oculus VR via Kickstarter. During the campaign, he received verbal backing from industry legend and Doom creator John Carmack, and also received endorsement from Gabe Newell himself at Valve and Cliffy B at Epic. With an initial target of only a mere $250,000, by the end of the month, Oculus VR was 975% funded, totaling $2.4 million. John Carmack was so impressed and on board that anyone who backed the project enough to receive a unit would get a VR port of Doom 3 for free. The Rift, though, was not yet at the consumer level, as these were at the time development kits for developers to make their own VR games. The future of the company at Oculus was changing, though. On March 25, 2014, Facebook bought Oculus VR for $2 billion. Palmer exited Oculus 3 years later to work with other projects with his very large package from the buyout. While under new ownership, Oculus was just getting started. Google was taking notice to what was happening in the Oculus scene, but their approach to VR was one that all could enjoy, not those with lavish PC rigs and expensive headsets. In 2014, Google launched the Google Cardboard VR viewer. The Google Cardboard was literally cardboard that you purchased from Google for the low price of about $5, or you could make your own from online templates. Instead of having a PC and expensive HMD do the work, Cardboard used the display and processing power from your smartphone, which would fit inside the cardboard shroud. Cardboard was compatible with most major smartphone manufacturers' phones at the time, and yes, even Apple iPhone worked with it. After installing the Cardboard app in Google Play or the App Store, videos in VR from YouTube could be enjoyed along with games and 360 photos that were taken with the now sadly depreciated Photosphere feature. Google provided a free SDK to develop Cardboard-enabled software and VR-enabled content. Cardboard, though, only supported a limited 3 degrees of freedom, unlike the Rift, which was 6 DOF. A few years after release, Google said that 5 million Cardboard viewers shipped and touted the Cardboard SDK had over 1,000 apps pushed live. Google stopped selling the Cardboard 6 years later, but the Cardboard app can still be used and downloaded for those who possess legacy devices. Google wouldn't end this with Cardboard VR, though. With the positive reception and mass user base Google received from Cardboard, which started off as a time-off project from 2 Google engineers, Google went to work on a successor. At Google I/O in 2016, it was announced that a successor to Cardboard would be called Daydream. The Daydream headset sold for $80 and used the same idea as Cardboard did, with having a smartphone be the bridge for VR access. The Cardboard app was accessible with a simple download from Google Play and iOS Store, but Daydream was built directly into Android Nougat OS and therefore was an Android exclusive this time around. Because Daydream was a more restrictive software-based VR, this severely limited the amount of compatible Daydream-ready Android phones compared to the Cardboard. Once a supported phone was plugged into a Daydream headset, the phone automatically opened a low-latency VR mode that was built for VR consumption. The Daydream came with a bundled controller which had touch and motion support. Due to the higher price point and significantly smaller interest from developers, Daydream did not have the success, support, and same reception that they had previously with Cardboard, and it was killed off by Google only 3 years later. After this, Google moved away from VR and pivoted towards the AR and XR field. But smartphone-focused VR wouldn't end with Google, and Oculus was also taking notes of this more broader approach of VR that Google had attempted. A year after the acquisition by Facebook in 2015, the electronics company Samsung collaborated with Oculus for the Samsung Gear VR for $130. The Gear VR was a plastic shroud that used once again the processing power from your smartphone, but this time limited to Galaxy phones like the Note 4 and S10 Plus. Once the phone was attached to the Gear VR device, the phone opened up a Oculus VR mode. The Oculus Home on the Gear VR matched the current experience from the Rift, which had Oculus games and media could be enjoyed in VR. This was the first time Oculus provided a wireless VR experience, although this was at the cost of your smartphone heating up and absolutely decimating the battery life of any phone it was connected to. Based on the product's name, the Samsung Gear VR was only compatible with Samsung phones and did not offer the same versatility that Cardboard had. In 2019, Oculus CTO John Carmack called the Gear VR a missed opportunity and noted the sales of the product were higher than all current Oculus headsets by 2017, which was at a staggering 5 million. 5 years later, in 2020, Samsung had begun to phase out certain Gear VR features and store purchases online. By the next year after, in 2021, Samsung's next iteration of Android pulled support from the Gear VR altogether. Just like with Google, Samsung has not currently expressed any desire to return back to the VR field, but is slowly dabbling with an extended reality headset. Based in Shanghai, China, Pimax Technologies was founded in November 2015 and released its first headset, the Pimax 4K, in April 2016. Being PC VR exclusive, the Pimax required external tracking base stations which would be set up in the corner of a space. Throughout the years, Pimax has released 8K, 5K, and even 12K models. While the Pimax has a rather niche status in VR usage, it offers one of the largest FOVs out there, with their newest Pimax Crystal Super being at 120 FOV and also offering eye tracking and even foveated rendering. While having new owners, Oculus Rift was far from dead, and with funding from such a large source, this would guarantee the long-term life of the platform. A few prototypes later and an improved DK2 version, finally, in 2015, it was announced that a consumer-grade CV1 version would release to all $300 Kickstarter backers. During the announcement, Oculus co-founder Brandon Ereep said that because of a partnership with Microsoft, the CV1 Rift would be bundled with an Xbox One controller for free for a $600 package. The CV1 launched on March 25, 2016 with hits like The Climb, Robo Recall, Lucky's Tale, and more. Just like with the original Rift, the Rift required base stations and room sensors for motion tracking and had a high price of entry. The Rift originally shipped with a simple motion remote, until 6 months later when the superior Oculus Touch controllers replaced both the remote and Xbox One controller in a $500 bundle. Oculus never officially confirmed sales numbers, but Nielsen revealed that it lagged behind the Samsung Gear and other competitors. By July 2018, over 500,000 CV1 units were sold. Oculus was just getting its footing in the consumer market, but Facebook had its eyes fixated on mass market accessibility. When Gabe Newell first witnessed Palmer Luckey's Rift in 2012, he was likely inspired to have Valve themselves look further into VR. The first endeavor was a collaboration with HTC in April 2016 with the HTC Vive headset for $800. HTC touted the Vive as a premium VR experience, and it was announced that the Vive would work with Valve's new PC Steam VR interface. The HTC Vive relied on external bay trackers that needed to be placed in corners of a room to achieve the best tracking experience. The original model provided a 1080p display at a 90Hz refresh rate. HTC released many Vive successors, including a Pro model which had an upgraded 1440p resolution and a slimmer form factor, a Pro 2 which had an advertised 5K resolution and 120Hz refresh rate, a standalone business-oriented Focus unit and an improved PC VR Cosmos model, and finally, Elite and Flow extended reality units that have the form factor of eyewear. The sales of the Vive were reportedly to be only around 140,000 units in a 6-month period, and were significantly behind Oculus and Sony's Project Morpheus. The expensive price point compared to Oculus was a major factor for this. While HTC was lacking, they reported the Vive sold at a profit and generated over $1 billion in revenue. In 2019, 1.3 million headsets were sold in the HTC VR family. While the Vive has never hit a stride large enough to compete with Oculus's impending market share, they have now shifted their focus towards VR for businesses and enterprise usage rather than the gaming and casual demographics that Oculus was able to capture so quickly due to the significantly lower price of a pending standalone headset. Recently in January 2025, HTC let Google acquire a number of its Vive engineers and a non-exclusive license for HTC's XR tech for $250 million. Google has stated this deal is to ensure the success of the previously mentioned Android XR platform. Originally codenamed Project Morpheus, the PlayStation VR released on October 13, 2016 for $400. During development, it was revealed that after the release of the PS3 Move controller, Sony had larger plans in mind for VR and wanted to make a future headset for gaming. Sony's president Shuhei Yoshida went on the record to say that Morpheus would shape the future of PlayStation. Andrew House said the PSVR sales sold far beyond expectations and had critical acclaim from both consumers and critics, eventually ranking at 2 million sold only a year after launch and 5 million sold by 2019. Mark Cerny, yes, that one who worked with Sega for the Segascope, said the PSVR would even be compatible with the PS5. During the height of the PSVR's launch, Sony revealed a healthy mix of third-party and first-party developers of around 230 were working on content for the headset. Without needing a high-end PC, with just a PS4 and PSVR, you could enjoy VR titles like Beat Saber, Skyrim VR, Astrobot Rescue, Resident Evil 7, and more, with over 500 titles to choose from. Because this was on a Sony platform, though, it was intentionally decided to not support PC VR in any way and would only be playable with games on developers that released or ported to the system. Just like with the Rift and the Vive, it was criticized for requiring a link connector to your console, with having the VR experience be a tethered one. A high price point was also a factor with critics, with the PSVR experience requiring a PlayStation 4 console, a PSVR headset, and a PlayStation camera, which was originally not included at launch. The camera was later bundled in 2017 as a response to a price cut from the Oculus Rift and HTC Vive headset. With this newfound and unexpected success, Sony was already working on a PSVR successor for the PS5. Starting off based on a platform by Microsoft for HoloLens called Windows Mixed Reality, the first VR headset that was not exclusive to XR was the Lenovo Explorer. As just mentioned, the Explorer was based on the Windows Mixed Reality platform that planned to be a universal standard of Windows OSs, potentially to compete with Valve Steam's VR. The Explorer, along with most of the other mixed reality headsets in this family, had 1440 specs to compete with the Oculus Rift at the time. Noteworthy HMDs were the Samsung Odyssey with its AMOLED display and 110 FOV, and the HP Reverb, which touted a 2160 display that carried an even larger FOV at 114, which was second to the largest FOV next to the Pimax 5K. The Mixed Reality Portal offered a VR storefront, but the selection of games and apps remained paltry. Mixed Reality was not a success for Microsoft, and the adoption of the platform from customers and developers was a failure. Microsoft announced that Mixed Reality would not be supported in any way on a future Windows 11 update in 2025. Because Mixed Reality HMDs required this platform to function to use Steam VR, this depreciation would make all Windows Mixed Reality headsets useless. All is not lost though. Forgotten by Microsoft with a quite selfish disregard for previous product purchasers, a Microsoft developer on Reddit named Mbuchia announced they are working on a closed-source driver called Oasis. Mbuchia stated they previously worked in the mixed reality department at Microsoft, and their goal for Oasis would free these HMDs from having the mixed reality platform be the requirement for usage, which in turn would allow them to be used again instead of currently being a brick. As of June 2025, they have stated this will be released around September of that year. Announced in October 2017, the standalone Oculus Go released on May 1st, 2018 for $200. While the Rift required a pretty high-end PC to run, the Go was the first wireless standalone headset that didn't require killing your smartphone slowly. The Go was widely praised on release as being the first time true standalone VR was made possible with an untethered experience. Walmart claimed to be using the Go to train associates, and certain online media video entertainment companies said the standalone VR opportunities would be a game changer. Because of the standalone design though, the quality and power was significantly downgraded to make it fit in such a small form factor. The Go was limited to 3DOF, and Oculus unfortunately was not prepared with a robust software selection, and it was not a long-term success for the company. 5 months after the Go's launch, co-founder Brandon Uribe left Oculus due to the company's continued focus on the low-end, larger casual market instead of the high-end and expensive demographics that Brendan was aiming for. Brandon said that chasing this market was a race to the bottom, and the company's focus to standalone Go and the cancellation of the PC-focused Rift 2 were the reason for his departure. By June 23, 2020, only 2 years into the life of the Go, Facebook announced the end of support for the device. Oculus head Hugo Barra said that a majority of users who had a Go stopped using it only after a month. This data is all the more unfortunate as market analysts estimated that the Go in its total lifetime sold around 2 million units. While the Go stumbled, this was only a stepping stone in store for something much greater for Oculus. Nintendo's Virtual Boy failed to impress mostly anyone. They would attempt this idea again, but 23 years later. Nintendo released the Labo VR kit for the Nintendo Switch on April 12, 2019. As in the name, the VR Labo kit was an expansion for the cardboard Nintendo Labo series that Nintendo first introduced a year prior. The full VR kit experience costed $80, while the starter pack that came with a blaster and viewer was $40. Separate VR Labo add-ons could be purchased for $20 apiece. Just like with all the other Labo series, the VR kit was constructed of cardboard which would need to be put together. Similar to the previous Gear and Google Cardboard viewers, the Nintendo Switch console would go into the cardboard viewer or other VR kit and would provide the experience. The VR Labo series had 4 kits, from a blaster, camera, bird, and even an elephant kit. The blaster was for an on-rails shooting gallery, while the camera kit had a minigame used to take photos of sea life and a character named Fluffball in their house. The bird and wind pedal had a bird flying and frog jumping minigame, and the elephant was used for painting and some mini puzzle games, which was the only kit to provide a 6DOF experience. Labo VR was an attempt to make VR more accessible to the masses and younger demographics. Reviewers though said the VR experience was blurry and uncomfortable for the eyes and face. It was also said that it felt like the Nintendo Switch's 720p display was not really built for looking at up close. During the Labo VR's life, Nintendo also wanted to make purchases of the VR kit worthwhile for other audiences, as they added a few VR modes for a small handful of games. After this, Nintendo pulled all references from Labo on its website in 2021. Nintendo is slowly revisiting VR though. In 2026, they will be releasing the Nintendo Virtual Boy for the Nintendo Switch family, which will even have its own peripheral. While Nintendo has never commented on the success of Labo, most will admit that it was a failure that only lasted 3 years. Speaking of 3 years, in 2019, a successor to the CV1 announced was called the Oculus Rift S and released 2 months later in May of that year. Despite being technically inferior in some ways to the original CV1, the $400 Rift S had inside-out tracking, which meant that the external trackers were not required this time around, and the tracking cameras were built onto the headset itself. The Rift S also had a pass-through plus mode, which allowed users to see through the headset camera at the real world around them without having to take the headset off. On September 2020, Facebook announced that the Rift S would be discontinued in the coming year of 2021 due to the mass adoption of a more easily accessible standalone Go successor. At this point, Facebook completely pivoted away towards the PC VR demographic and went headfirst towards the low-end casual but exponentially larger market. Sadly, the Rift S would be the last PC-oriented Rift that would be released by Oculus and Facebook, being replaced by the more favorable standalone. On the same release date as the Rift S, Oculus released an improved 6DOF standalone headset called the Oculus Quest. With Facebook burying the Rift in a shallow grave, the Quest was out to replace the once PC VR exclusive headset. The Quest could connect to a PC and provide a Rift-like experience for the Rift games and storefront. The headset released at a price of $400 for the 64GB SKU and $500 for the 128GB model. Comparing to other PC-bound VR options, the Quest provided a very large entry point into VR with its lower price. Reviewers and critics alike stated that the Quest was improbably amazing for its size at a $399 price tag. The Quest had a 1440 display per eye at 72Hz. Alongside the Rift S, it also came with improved Oculus Touch controllers that had inside-out tracking via IR-embedded rings on the controller itself. 6 months later, the Quest got support for controllerless hand tracking, being able to play supported Quest games with just your hands. Avoiding the mistakes that were made with the Go, Quest launched with a plethora of noteworthy titles like Super Hot VR, Beat Saber, Vader Immortal, I Expect You to Die, and many more. The pivot to fully standalone from PC-focused Rift was a game-changer for Oculus, as they announced in July that 1.1 million headsets were sold and $5 million worth of content was sold in just 2 weeks on their storefront. PC VR versions of games, though, still provided significantly better performance and higher graphical fidelity. These graphical compromises did not seem to faze the customer base, who were more than willing to deal with the trade-off for easily accessible standalone VR. Facebook and Oculus had cracked the code for accessible VR and were just getting started. Next time on the history of video games. Valve learns from their HTC collaboration with the Vive and enters the VR fray independently for the first time. Sony also continues on their path of VR shaping the future of PlayStation, but not to the same reception as expected. That and much more to come next time on the conclusion of VR on the history of video games. This is the Nostalgic Millennial, and stay classic.